Section 1B, rounding whole numbers. Okay, so now that we know what whole numbers are, and we know what the place values are, and how to determine how to say the number in words, or take a number that's in words and put it into standard form or numerical form, now we can look at rounding whole numbers. Well, what does it mean to round in a whole number? Well, sometimes we have numbers that are very specific. 62,581. And although that's great, so 62,581 people are enrolled at such and such university. That's good, but sometimes we don't want to state all of that. 62,581. It's too much. We don't want to work with it. So what we do is we round. It's basically approximating by following certain rules. So when we're rounding, we want to say, well, rather than saying all of this, I'd rather just say, to the nearest 100. 62,581 to the nearest 100. So basically, instead of giving you the whole number here, we're going to approximate it and say, gee, 62,581 is approximately that little double squiggle there, approximately equal to 62,600. Notice how much easier it is to say that, 62,581 versus 62,600. 600 versus 581, right? There's less work involved. And when you think of numbers that may be fluctuating a little bit too, then this is a consistent number as opposed to this where, they get another student, now it's 582. They lose a student, now it's 580, right? So by rounding, what we're doing is we're choosing a place value and saying, I'm going to get as close as I can with that place value. So when I say I'm rounding this to 100, to the nearest 100, what I'm really doing is I'm saying, okay, if I've got 62,581 and I want to round it to the nearest 100, then I'm going to look at that and say, okay, well, that's going to be between 62,500 and 62,600. Because 81 is greater than, 581 is larger than 500, right? But it's less than 600. So we're saying, which is it closer to? Is 62,581 closer to 62,500 or 62,600? I said it's closer to 62,600. Well, how can I determine that? Well, there's a couple ways. One, I can look at it and say, well, gee, 581, that just looks closer to 600. It's only 19 away. If I had 19 more people, I'd be at 600, whereas this is 81 more than 500. The other thing you can do is you can actually look and find the point in between. The number in between would be 62,550. That's halfway between 500 and 600. Right? Halfway between 500 and 600 is 550. So going the next place over and making that a 5 gives me halfway in between. So now I say, well, is 581 as much or more than 550? Or is it less than 550? If it's as much as 550 or more than 550, then we're going to say we're closer to 62,600 because it's higher and it's closer to that value. If it's less than 550, we say, oh, well, then it's closer to 62,500. And you can see that 581 is larger than 550. There's more of them there. So therefore, I said we're closer to 62,600. So that's one way we can think about it when we're rounding, is we can look and say, well, where's halfway in between is it in the top half or the bottom half? If it's in the top half, then we're going to move up. If it's in the bottom half, then we're going to move down. Now, another way we can do this, and my preferred method, I think it just flows nicer for me, is we want to round to a certain place value, so we take that and we underline that place value. Then I look at the number to the right. So I put a little arrow there and say, I'm looking at this one. I'm looking at that 8. And it's always the number to the right we look at. And if you remember with our halfway, we ended up with a 5 there. If the number to the right is 5 or more, then we're going to round up. Which means we're going to move this up to the next higher value, so from 5 to a 6, and then we're going to fill in those with zeros. If it's 4 or less, then we're going to round down, which means we keep this number as it is, and we get rid of these and turn them into zeros, which means that we've lowered the value, right? We went from 581 down to 500. That's rounding down. We moved the number down. We didn't change this value to a lower value, but by getting rid of the 81, we turned it into 0, so made it 500, which is less than 581. When we rounded up, we had to move it up because if we just make these into zeros, we're going down. So we had to move this up to a 6 and put 0, 0 to move it up. So by looking at that, I say, oh, 62,581, rounded to the nearest hundred, we're looking for the hundreds. We look to the right, we see an 8, and 8 is 5 or more, so we're going to round up, so we get 62,600. So let's grab another number and look at this. What if I want to round the following number, 318,461, to the nearest 1,000. So I'm just going to write that down. Nearest 1,000. So if we want to round to the nearest 1,000, I'm going to use the method I prefer. I'm going to underline that out, right? First we need to know the place value. There we go. 8's in the 1,000 place. We're going to look to the right and see that that number is a 4. Since that's a 4 or lower, we're going to round down. So we make it 318, 0, 0, 0. And notice that 318,000 is less than 318,461. We didn't have to move that down. But that's where we are. If we looked for the in-between value, 318,000 and 319,000, halfway between would be 318,500. Which would mean this would be in the lower half, telling us to move down to 318,000. Let's try the same thing, but do it to a different place value. What if we want to round to the nearest 10? We want to round to the nearest 10. We underline the 10's place. We look at the 1's place. 1 is less than 4. So we're going to round down, so you get 318,460. Let's try one more with this one. What if we round to the nearest 10,000? The nearest 10,000. Well, there's the 10,000s place, so we're going to look at the thousands place. The thousands place is 8, which is 5 or greater, so we're going to round up. So we make it 3, 2, and then 0, 0, 0, 0. Don't forget to fill everything else in with zeros. So now we went from 318,461 to 320,000. And notice we rounded to the 10,000s place. Therefore, there's only zeros to the right of the 10,000s place. There's the 10,000s place. Everything else is a 0. And that's how we round whole numbers. and that covers section 1B.